I am completely enamored of Wade Davis and what he has done for the world. He's the author of some, I don't know, 2 dozen, 3 dozen books, or co-author. He's traveled the world. He's a cultural ambassador. He's an honorary citizen of Colombia. I think it's even more than that, but I forget exactly what it is, Wade. Excuse me. Excuse me. He has written extensively about cultural and biodiversity, and has traveled with some of the greats in the pioneers of psychedelic work, like Richard Evans Schultes and others. And he's also, I hope he doesn't mind my saying, one of the most silver-tongued orators on the planet. Please welcome Wade Davis.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephen. I was listening to that wonderful song and looking at this San Pedro, and I remembered once Tim Plowman and I took a heroic dose of this plant, and I was about to send a telegram to Professor Schultes: "Dear Professor, we are all ambulatory plants." Fortunately, Tim cut me off at the pass. But I'm going to speak to you today about people who really do believe that people are just plants in another dimension of reality, and vice versa. Sorry, I'm going to speak today about people who really do believe that plants are but people in another dimension of reality, and vice versa. You know, Richard Evans Schultes, the great pioneer, had his own heroes. He's our hero, but his hero, of course, was the great plant explorer Richard Spruce, who between 1849 and 1864 spent 17 uninterrupted years in the Amazon. It was Spruce who was the first European to identify the use of ayahuasca. And to understand the affection that Dick Schultes had for Richard Spruce, you really have to accept the possibility that the seed of one generation can literally be born in the next, and that the spirit of one long dead can reach across time, not only to inspire, but to literally mold the life of another. Schultes was once asked if he had perhaps subconsciously or unconsciously modeled his life on the life of Richard Spruce, and he interrupted the journalist and he said, "It was conscious." And their relationship began in a rather extraordinary way in 1922, when Dick Schultes, at the age of 7, was dying of fever in a hospital in East Boston. And his father sat by his bedside table for days at end and read, of all things, the 2-volume book of letters and notes that Lord Alfred Wallace had edited after Spruce's death, Notes of a Botanist on the Amazon and the Andes. And in some kind of atavistic way, Schultes absorbed the spirit of this man. And in fact, when Spruce did collect yahe for the first time, he sent specimens of the raw bejuco back to Kew Gardens, and they got lost. And finally, in 1969, Schultes went there on a singular mission to find that collection, and he did. And amazingly, the plants were still biodynamically active after all those years. And when Spruce, the first European to discover yahe, which he called kapi, he wrote that white men who have partaken of kapi in the proper way concur in the account of their sensations under its influence. The sight is disturbed, and visions pass rapidly before the eyes, wherein everything gorgeous and magnificent they had heard or read or ever experienced seems to come together as a single spirit. A Brazilian friend said that when he took one full dose of kapi, he saw all the marvels he had read of in the Arabian Nights pass immediately before his eyes as in a panorama. The Indians say they see beautiful lakes, woods laden with fruit, birds of brilliant plumage, and so on and so forth. You know, this is kind of amazing language in 1852 to be writing. And of course, Schultes, inspired by Spruce, set off into the Amazon in 1941. His first encounter with yahe was in the valley of Simandoi, when he fell into the orbit of this extraordinary shaman, Salvador Shindoi, and the entire traje of the Ingano, or the Kamsa, or indeed the Kofan, was a conscious effort to mimic in daily life the deportment of the spirit beings encountered during the yahe experience. And curiously, one of the early pioneers, and what I'm trying to get at in this talk is to sort of develop where did this sort of pop ayahuasca movement begin and where is it now? And what can we learn about the way that ayahuasca or yahe was actually used in deep traditional context? And so this idea of a kind of gringo tourism began really inspired both by the work of Schultes, but also because of that famous exchange of letters between William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg. And actually, in 1952, Burroughs went down to South America looking, as he wrote, to Ginsberg for the ultimate mind-bending high. And if you read the Yahe letters, he goes to the Botanical Institute, National Herbarium in Bogota, and he meets a man who looks unmistakably Harvard, and that is Doc Schindler, and that is Schultes. And then Burroughs goes down to the Putumayo, and within 24 hours is rolled by a hustler, beat up by pimps, and arrested by the police. And he goes back to Bogota, and he writes Ginsberg, and he says, "I'll give it one more crack, but this time I'm staying close to Doc Schindler." And so Schultes and Burroughs go down to Mocoa in 1952. Within 24 hours, Burroughs is tripping on ayahuasca thanks to Schultes, but he has one cardinal thought, that shaman's entire mission of life was to poison men such as himself. So he downs a bunch of downers and bolts out of there. But curious, Burroughs was the very first person to collect the admixture, which we now know to be so fundamental to the preparation or the potion that is ayahuasca. He was the first person to collect a specimen of Diploteris or Psychotria viridis. And it was their correspondence that I think sparked this kind of fascination with ayahuasca. And certainly by the time I was traveling around Colombia with Tim Plowman in 1974, there was already a sort of a small trade, as many of you may remember, on the road between Sibundoy and Mocoa. And this sort of grew over time into what we know today in the environs of Iquitos, for example. Now, the curious thing is, if you read about Burroughs' reaction, it was really actually consistent with what most indigenous people describe. I once took yahe with the kofan in traditional context. In the morning after, we had a kind of spontaneous post-mortem, and I confessed through my colleague Randy Borman, the chief, that the stuff sometimes scared the shit out of me. And all the indigenous people said, "Of course it does, that's the point." And when you actually look at the metaphors that are used by indigenous people, they speak of, you're sucking at the tit of jaguar woman, and then she tears you off her breast and flings you into a pit of vipers. I mean, that's the metaphors. They don't think it's supposed to be nice. It's many things, but nice is not among them. And if I had been asked in 1974 to name the one entheogen that 50 years hence would be the substance of renown that it has become, I would not have picked ayahuasca at all. And when you think of what goes on around Iquitos, where today there are over 120 ayahuasca lodges catering to the trade, restaurants that specialize in menus, catering to the dietary needs of seekers, new movements, millenarian movements like UDV and Santo Daime, these modern syncretic movements of faith and discipline with very strict spiritual structures serving the needs of the acolytes. All of this is kind of wondrous, and certainly I am not one to judge any of it in any way, but I do want to stress that this sort of exportation of the New Age idea that taking these substances is a journey of personal revelation, that you're taking them in order to solve your challenges in life or to achieve your own spiritual aspirations, all of which are utterly legitimate goals. I always try to make the point that not only did I take psychedelics, I wouldn't write the way I write. If I hadn't, I wouldn't think the way I think. I wouldn't be the person I became. In fact, I remember my mother always saying, "Don't take these things, you'll never come back the same." And that was the whole fucking point. So I think that it's very important to remember that when we look at the recipe that provoked these extraordinary social changes we've lived through, whereby women have gone from the kitchen to the boardroom, black people from the woodshed to the White House, gay people from the closet to the altar, our whole vision of Gaia, all of this is because tens and tens and tens of thousands of us lay prostrate before the gates of awe, having taken some psychedelic. So I think they were catalytic, and that's something we should proudly acknowledge, and that's why the Renaissance that you're all part of is so important. But that said, let me take you on a kind of a deep journey into the Northwest Amazon. In 1541, when Aureliana first went down the Amazon with the Dominican friar Caspar de Carvajal, he didn't encounter an empty forest. It was a river dense with population. We now believe there may have been as many as 10 million people living in the Amazon at the time of European contact. But by the time anthropologists in numbers poured into the Amazon in the wake of World War II, the main trunk of the Amazon, of course, had been long depleted, depopulated by the arrival of diseases that didn't decimate the people, because decimation means to kill 1 in 10. It was 90% who were swept away within a generation of contact. Now, that left in their wake a kind of a riverine peasantry that some of you know, the caboclos, who invoke both the adaptive technologies of indigenous people and some of their cosmologies even. But these are people that are far removed from the ways of those who first lived in that forest, people for whom their only presence is sort of whispered messages in the forest. And these anthropologists were drawn to the so-called real Indians. These were these isolated groups known as the marginal peoples, not because they were primitive, but because they literally lived at the margin of the basin, protected by geography and rapids and cataracts from the east and the Andean Cordillera to the west, which was not penetrated, pierced by roads until the 1940s. Now, these societies tended to be endogenous, isolated, often in open conflict with their neighbors, living what was seen as a somewhat precarious existence. And that kind of reinforced our idea of the Amazon being this fragile place that could endure our ways only for so long, which fit perfectly into the environmental agenda that emerged in the 1970s. And the question had always lingered amongst anthropologists: was there a place in the Amazon where at least the echo of the ancient civilizations that we now know from archaeological studies did indeed exist in the Amazon? Is there an echo of that world to be found in the remote reaches of the basin? And the answer is yes. In the homeland of the people of the Anaconda, the Northwest Amazon of Colombia, the Barasana, the Macuna, the Tanimucas. Now, when I first visited this region, rather innocently in 1974, it was a rather sad place, dominated still by missionaries, the shadow of the rubber era. You felt that something very important had happened a long time ago. I remember once we interviewed, years later, some elders, and we asked them, why did you allow the missionaries to do what they did and say what they did say? And these elders said to us, because they promised to make us human. And that, of course, is the essence of colonization, is to persuade the colonized of their own inherent inferiority. And all of this is the amazing part of the story. Not only we would have lost the opportunity to listen to these descendants of the ancient civilizations, but more importantly, we would have lost the opportunity that was not even available to Schultes to truly understand what ayahuasca meant to them and how it mediated their lives. But then a miracle happened. In 1986, Colombian President Virgilio Barco said to a friend of mine, Martin von Hildebrand, to do something for the Indians. And as he put it, and within 5 years, 5 incredible years, Martin did more than something. As head of Indian Affairs, he secured legal land tenure to an area of land collectively the size of the United Kingdom for the 57 ethnicities of the Northwest Amazon. And then behind the veil of isolation caused by the absence of the federal state due to the problems of modern Colombia, a whole new dream of culture was reborn. And this is the world that we have been able, mercifully, to come to understand. For all the peoples of the Anaconda, rivers are not just routes of communication. They're the veins of the earth. They're the link between the living and the dead, the paths along which the ancestors traveled at the beginning of time. All of their myths vary, but they all speak of a journey in the belly of an anaconda or in sacred canoes drawn by the anaconda, canoes that had the first people arrayed in hierarchical order, but also the key plants, coca, cassava, and yahe, all gifts of father-son. And the mythical heroes were in hierarchical order: the chiefs, the wisdom keepers, the dancers, chanters, the warriors, the shaman, and the servants. But all were brothers and sisters, children of the sun. And when the serpents reached the heart of the world, they lay over the land, outstretched as rivers, their heads forming river mouths, their tails winding away to the very headwaters. And each river welcomed a different canoe, and in each canoe, the archetypal heroes merged into a single people. And thus the rivers of this remote part of the Amazon were populated by specific peoples: the Desana on the Papuri, the Barasan and Tatuyos on the Upper Piraparaná, the Tucano on the Valpes, the Macuna on the Popiaco, and so on and so forth, Tanimucos on the Miriti and the Apopores. And as the hierarchy broke down, the people fused into one, but they were always brothers and sisters, so you could not marry amongst yourself. So one of the most extraordinary social structures in these societies is the marriage rule called linguistic exogamy. You must marry someone who speaks a different language. And so in any one longhouse, you have 6 and 7 languages spoken. And one inevitable consequence of that marriage rule is a certain tension within the community, but also this ongoing quest for marriage partners, which leads to these extraordinary rituals necessary to bring all peoples together. And it's these rituals where Yahweh becomes the great mediator. Now, the night when I returned with Martine, before we flew out of Mitu, we huddled on the floor of a modest lodging, taking coke and tobacco as Martine unveiled the map of our journey. And with us was Ricardo Marin, a shaman. And Martine, then, working with the communities, has now fomented this complete rebirth of culture. And in Barasana, there is no word for time. The sacred sites are not symbols of the past or memorials. They are living places that eternally inform the present. Because for the Barasana, with no notion of time, the past is the present, and the sacred sites to this day are inhabited by mythic beings. And so as we leapt above the canopy like a dragonfly and bursting into the clouds, the entire forest, the entire world of the Barasana stretched to the horizon. And I was watching Ricardo, the shaman, in front of me as we sort of circumnavigated the entire world of the peoples of the Anaconda, reaching the confluence of the Caquetá and the Apoporis, the great cataracts of Uisi and Hirihirimo, and then eventually reaching beyond, looking up to the great uplands of Chiribiquete, discovered by Schultes in 1943, and Cerro Campana, where he climbed. And he used to say that he had to shut his eyes to just avoid seeing new species previously unknown to science, because logistically he could not collect, because he was on this great mission of the war, the study of rubber. And we landed later that day at San Miguel, the very Catholic mission where I had taken Yahweh in 1977, a time when it seemed so sad. And I recognized the fields, I recognized the setting of the Maloca, the white sands along the shores where the children bathed in the black waters of the Piraparaná. But other than that, everything was different. A mission that I recalled as a sad place was gone. That night, more than 100 men gathered in Maloca in full ritual regalia to dance, chant, and take sacred medicines, coca, tobacco, and chicha, and yahe. Shaman huddled over calabashes of spirit food, whispering and singing soft spells. And that was the first night I ever heard the haunting sound of the sacred Yuripari trumpets, something that Richard Spruce had spoken about when he wrote in his journals in the 1850s. These had been long condemned by the Catholic priests as symbols of the devil, mythic instruments that were crushed and burned during the years of domination by the church. And now it was amazing to hear the sounds under the influence of Yahweh, with all of these men from Barasana, Tatuyo, and Macuna lineages, all peoples of the river, suggesting the amazing resurgence and resilience of culture. And over the course of the month, guided by Martine and Ricardo, and other Makuna and Badasana leaders, we traveled all the rivers, attended ceremonies, visited sacred sites, cataracts where the culture heroes had done battle with the forces of darkness, the waterfalls that once ran red with the menstrual blood of Romikumu, the great mother and the progenitor of the world. And flying in to join us midway was Stephen Hugh Jones, the former head of anthropology at Cambridge, who with his wife Christine had lived with the Badasana in the late 1960s. He's now a revered elder, one of few outsiders to speak the language. He had dedicated his life to understanding the cosmology of these extraordinary people. And in the late 1960s and early 70s, he was part of a BBC strand of films called Disappearing Worlds, and he sadly then had predicted the inevitable demise of the Badasana culture. And he comes in, and he happened to join us, and the Maloka was full of 250 men in full regalia taking yahe. And he couldn't believe his eyes, and he got outside of his satellite phone and called his wife in London. He said, "Christine, you won't believe my eyes. The only thing that disappeared are the fucking the missionaries." And so having Stephen with us was an extraordinary opportunity because it was kind of an ongoing seminar of enchantment. And as Stephen taught, there was no beginning and end in Badasana thought, no linear progression of time, destiny, or fate. Theirs is a fractal world in which no event has a life of its own. Any number of ideas can exist in the same moment at parallel levels of perception and meaning. Scale yields to intention. Every object must be understood at various levels of analysis. So a rapid is an impediment to travel, but also a house of the ancestors. A stool is not a symbol of the shaman, it is the shaman because he sits upon the mountaintop of it. A row of stools is the ancestral anaconda. A corona of oropendula feathers is not symbol of the sun. Each feather is indeed an actual ray of the sun. And the infinite elements of the Badasana world kind of spin like a carousel in your mind, and there's no one obvious point of entry, save perhaps the Maloka, the longhouse, which is both a physical space in which people live, but also a cosmic model of the universe. And if civilizations are judged by monumental architecture, surely these great Malokas of the Northwest Amazon rival anything the Inca or the Maya ever constructed. They're enormous, 40 meters in length, 20 abreast, with vaulted ceilings rising to 10 meters above a dirt floor hardened by 10,000 thunderous dance steps, as well as the quiet passage of children at dawn. The Maloka is the womb of the kindred, the dark and cool shelter of the clan, the communal space which occurs and out of which emerges every societal gesture of the spirit. The symmetry is exquisite. 8 vertical posts, evenly spaced, smaller ones near the door. The house beams are named for the clan ancestors. The painted designs on the facade depict the spirit beings and the patterns you see when you take yahe. On a mundane level, the Maloka is divided between the genders, with one end of it, the realm of the men, where tobacco is taken, coca or ipadu, mambe is prepared, and the other end, of course, is the creative space of the women. The roof of the Maloka is the sky. The house posts are stone pillars and mountains that support the sky. The mountains the mountains in turn are the petrified remains of ancestral beings, the culture heroes that created the world. The smaller posts represent the descendants of the original serpent. The ridgepole is both the path of the sun, the river of the sky, the Milky Way, and the artery that separates the living from the limits of the universe. The floor is the earth, and below it runs the underworld, the stream of death and sorrow. So as the celestial river crosses the sky, so too its opposite, the path of death, goes beneath the living. So each day as the sun travels across the sky, each night it returns, following the river of the underworld. The Badasana bury their elders along that axis in coffins of broken canoes. So as they go about their daily lives, living within a space literally perceived as a womb of their lineage, they literally walk every day above the physical remains of the ancestors. Now, as the spirits shift away, they travel by rivers. The Malokas are always carefully oriented around the axis of the rivers. And all of their myths speak of a time when the culture heroes brought order to the universe. Because if the longhouse itself is the womb of the kindred hovering over the entire universe, is a universal maloka of similar architectural form. And that is rooted, the posts of that are rooted on the sacred places. So for the Barasana, the world begins at the cataract of Uisi and ends at the cataracts of Hirihirimo. The hills and the falls of the Yuripari on the Valpes and Araraquara, the escarpments beyond the Canamari, these are all physical points of origin. Now, in their origin stories, there are many of them, but one of the most powerful tells of 4 great culture heroes, the Thunders, the Iowa, who traveled up the Milk River and came upon a place of utter chaos, a burnt, desolate landscape dominated by the essence of evil. They pushed as plows ahead of them the sacred trumpets of the Yuripari to create valleys and waterfalls. Rivers were born of their saliva. Slivers of wood that broke off in the effort became ritual artifacts. And as they journeyed toward the center of the world, the notes of the trumpets brought into being mountains and uplands, the posts and walls of the cosmic Maloka. At every turn, the Iowa confronted the forces of greed, avaricious spirits that thrived on destruction and coveted the world. And outwitting the monsters, they cast them into stone, like this stone here on the Pita Parana. And critically, this is where, critically they brought order to the universe, causing the essence and energy of the natural world to be released for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then, having stolen the creative fire from the vagina of the woman shaman, they made love to her, and fully satiated, the Iowa simply rose into the heavens to fall upon us as lightning and thunder. Now, each of these physical and geographical points of memory remains for the people absolutely alive and vital, the sacred nexus where human beings in the spirit realm come together. And thus, for the people living in the Parana, the entire natural world is saturated with meaning and cosmological significance. Every rock and waterfall embodies a story. Plants and animals literally are but distinct physical manifestations of the same spiritual essence. And it's into this world that lives behind this world of beyond perception, the world of the hay spirits, that the shaman must go. The shaman of the Barasana almost never use medicinal plants. Their journey is much less analogous to a priest or a physician than rather to an engineer who goes into the heart of the nuclear reactor to reprogram the cosmic order of the world. And for the Barasana, such renewal is absolutely essential because they see the earth as potent, the forest as being alive with spiritual and metaphysical beings. And so to live off the land is both to embrace its creative and destructive potential. And there is no separation between nature and culture. Without the forest and the rivers, people would perish, but without people, the natural world would have no order or meaning. All would be chaos. And thus the norms that drive social behavior also dictate how human beings must interact with the wild, with the plants and animals, with all the phenomena of the natural world, because everything is related, everything is connected as a single integrated whole. Mythology infuses land and life with meaning, encoding expectations and behaviors. And the incredible thing is that this idea has direct ramifications in terms of the ecological footprint of the people, because the way that you treat the forest is determined by cosmology. The myths amount, in a sense, to nothing more or less than a complex land management plan that dictated precisely how people in great numbers could live in the forest. Women create the daily food, the extraordinary act of harvesting every day. Think about this. Every day, the basic daily bread of the people is a deadly toxic plant full of cardiactive glycosides. But they take bitter manioc and they prepare it each day into the food for the people. And all food has an ambivalent potential. Food, in this sense, is power, and it represents a transfer of energy from one life form to another. And thus food is not something that is embraced casually. All food must go through the hands of the shaman. And when men go to the forest to fish or hunt, it's never a trivial passage. First, the shaman must travel in trance to negotiate with the masters of the animals, forming a mystical contract with the spirit guardians, in exchange always based on reciprocity. The Bhadasana compare hunting to marriage. It's a form of courtship in which one seeks the blessing of a greater authority for the honor of taking into one's family a precious being. So meat is not the right of the hunter, but a gift from the spirit world. To kill without permission is to risk death by a spirit guardian, be it in the form of a jaguar, anaconda, tapir, or harpy eagle. Man in the forest for the Bhadasana is always both predator and prey. And so all of these ideas come together into a rather extraordinary land management plan. You know, animals that are taboo turn out to be animals that are vulnerable, animals that, you know, a river crossing that one must not move over because of some cosmological sanction turns out to be spawning grounds. They eat very low on the food chain. Meat's available to them, but only the elders eat meat. Most of the diet, which is a delicious cuisine, is based on insects and cassava and innocent and simple purees. Now, where all this comes together is in ritual. And before leaving the Paraparana, we attended a fertility ceremony in honor of cassava woman. And it lasted for 2 days and 2 nights, attracting hundreds and hundreds of men and women from up and down the river to a maloca at Puerto Ortega. Our host was a Bhadasana shaman. The chief of the maloca was his brother. His wife was cassava woman, symbol of fertility. And all the hierarchy was there, the chanters, the dancers, the wisdom keepers, the chief, the shaman, the kumu, the priest. The shaman is like a minister of foreign affairs. He deals laterally with the forces of nature. The kumu deals vertically through time with the ancestors. He never improvises. His language is liturgical, archaic, beyond the understanding of those who do not know the language. The intensity of devotion is not just in the decorative, but rather, of course, in the essential, the copious amounts of yahe that must be prepared, or here, the men who prepare the feathered coronas to be used in the dance. They've been isolated in the maloca for over a month on a special diet, forbidden to eat meat or fish, away from their families. To create the brilliant yellow plumes, they pluck the feathers of a living bird and apply a paste of frog venom and toxic berries to the breast of the parrots, causing the new plumage, normally deep red, to emerge the color of the sun. The regalia, as I said, is not decorative. It is a literal connection to sacred space, the wings of the divine. And as the ritual begins with the families supporting it around the side, time collapses. There are 2 series of dances separated by liminal moments of the day, dawn, dusk, and midnight. And in donning the feathers, the yellow corona of pure thought, the white egret plumes of the rain, the men don't become symbols of the ancestors, they become the ancestors. Just as the river is the anaconda, the mountains are the houseposts of the world. The shaman is a shapeshifter, in one moment a predator, in another prey. He changes from fish to animal to human and back again, transcending every form, becoming pure energy, flowing through every dimension of reality, past and present, here and there, mythic and mundane. His chants recall by name every point of geography met on the ancestral journey of the anaconda, up the entire length of the Amazon, toponyms that we can trace back with complete accuracy to actual geographical points remembered through mythic time of a journey of 1,600 kilometers up the Milk River from the east, where the great civilizations once thrived. White people, Ricardo told me, see with their eyes, but the Bhadasanas see with their minds. They take ayahuasca for 2 days and 2 nights without stopping. They journey to both the dawn of time into the future, visiting every sacred site, paying homage to every creature as they celebrate their most profound cultural instinct and insight, the realization that animals and plants truly are only people in another dimension of reality. And this then is the essence of Bhadasana philosophy. Ayahuasca or yahe is not taken by the individual in an attempt to deal with his or her own destiny, his or her own challenges. On the contrary, the community is taking the substance together so that every gesture becomes a prayer for the survival of that community. And in doing so, it is a celebration of a world that we can now understand goes right back to the great civilizations of the Amazon. And this, in fact, is the essence of Bhadasana philosophy. And if you think about it, just, you can actually see that history. Consider just what all of this actually implies, what it tells us about this culture and its place in history. This, after all, is a tradition based not on war, but on knowledge acquired through time and intense priestly study and initiation. Status accrues not to the man of violence or the warrior, but to the man or woman of wisdom. Their malokas rival in grandeur the great architectural creations of humanity. They have a complex understanding of astronomy, solar calendars, intense notions of hierarchy and specialization. Their wealth is vested in ritual regalia, incredible featherwork, as elegant as any of that of a medieval court. Their systems of exchange, infinitely complex, facilitate peace, not war. And critically, their struggle, mediated by Yahe, to bring order to the universe, to maintain the energetic flows of life, and the specificity of their beliefs and adaptations leaves open the very remarkable possibility that the Bhadasana are literally the survivors of a world that once existed, the complex societies and chieftains that so astonished Caspar de Carvajal and Francisco de Orellana, the lost civilizations of the Amazon. And even more so and more incredibly, in their adaptation and cultural survival, the Bhadasana and Makuna and all the peoples of the Anaconda, in that world, we can glimpse something of the beliefs and convictions that allowed untold millions of people to live along the banks and in the forests of the Amazon basin without doing harm. When the Bhadasana today engage in ritual and take Yahe, this astonishing potion, and say that they travel through multiple dimensions, reliving the journey of the culture heroes, the Iowa, alighting on the sacred sites, accomplishing all of these amazing spiritual deeds, it is because they really do. And when we say that the Bhadasana and their neighbors both echo the ancient pre-Columbian past and point a way forward, embodying a model of how human societies can indeed live and thrive in the Amazon basin without laying waste to the forests, it's because they really can. Thanks very much.